Shelling continues. Diplomatic efforts are stepped up as Russia's invasion of Ukraine enters its fourth week.
This is Yin Khvat for TaiwanPlus, here at the Warsaw Expo Centre, which is now the largest refugee centre in Europe. I'm here for a report on the unprecedented global response to what is now the largest refugee crisis to hit Europe in decades.
8 years since the start of Taiwan's sunflower movement, we look at its legacy. And we look at how Taiwanese players are bringing out their A game on the court at the All England Badminton Championships. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Yin Khvat. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has entered its fourth week. Bombardment of Ukrainian cities has yet to let up, and diplomatic solutions remain out of sight. But the US and UK say logistical issues are stalling the Russian military offensive on the ground. This all comes as the Ukrainian president's calls for international help are growing louder. John Van Trieste has more.
The relentless shelling continued to devastate parts of Ukraine, with little distinction between civilian and military targets.
Все вышли мы на улицу, и я самая последняя вышла, и вот этот взрыв этот. Нас оставили без всего, мы все в подвалах живем, это ужас, разве можно так жить? За что? Скажите, вот за что? В чем мы виноваты? Перед кем?
In Mariupol, drone footage captured the growing numbers trying to flee the violence. The port city is surrounded by Russian forces and has seen some of the fiercest Russian bombardment. On Thursday, rescuers pulled over 100 survivors from the ruins of a theater, but hundreds of others who were in the building sheltering from a Russian onslaught are still missing. Turkey is stepping up its diplomatic efforts to find a compromise, positioning itself as a mediator between Russia and Ukraine. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan repeated offers to host peace talks after Russia's leader called him to lay out his demands. On Thursday, Turkey's foreign minister met with his Ukrainian counterpart in the western city of Lviv.
Bu iki ziyaretim neticesinde tabii savaşlarla ilgili kesin bir şey söylemek zor olur ama ateşkes umudumuz biraz daha artmıştır.
Where Russia's military goes from here is also unclear. The Pentagon describes Russian advances in Ukraine as frozen, and British military intelligence says the invasion has stalled. Many feel the only real momentum has been rhetorical. In an emotional appeal to Germany's Bundestag, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky referred to the events that led to the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Ніби знов за стіною. Так, не берлінською, але посеред Європи. Між свободою і неволею. І стіна ця міцніше з кожною бомбою, яка падає на нашу землю, на Україну. З кожним рішенням, яке не приймається заради миру, не приймається, хоча може допомогти.
Zelensky also criticized Germany for putting its economy ahead of Ukraine's fate. And, as with his pleas to parliaments in London and Ottawa and to the U.S. Congress, a standing ovation, but little else concrete to bring peace to his country. Patrick Chen and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
More than 2 million people have now crossed the border from Ukraine into Poland. Many of those fleeing attacks by Russia traveled to the capital, Warsaw, which has seen its population swell by at least 10% over the last few weeks. TaiwanPlus's Yin Khvat reports from the city on the response to Europe's largest refugee crisis in decades.
For 31-year-old Ukrainian Dasha Ivanovna, leaving home with her children was not an easy decision, and her husband had to stay behind. Without him, the young family has spent the last 3 days here in what is now the largest refugee center in Europe.
Ну, насколько это может быть нормально, то нормально. Хорошо тут. Здесь, в принципе, все в порядке, нам всего хватает. Вообще Польша хорошо нас принимает, очень приятно, даже до слез где-то. Вот. Ну, а так переживаем за наших родных. Переживаем. Читаем новости.
Dasha is just one of the 3 million people who have fled violence in Ukraine. Most of them are now in Poland, where authorities in the capital Warsaw are straining to cope with the swelling numbers.
This exhibition centre can sleep up to 20,000 people. It provides a temporary accommodation for people who have fled the conflict in neighbouring Ukraine. At the moment, 6,000 or 7,000 people are sleeping here whilst they wait to find more permanent accommodation or for onward travel to other places in Poland or around Europe.
Sophie Jiang is a Taiwanese expat teaching in Warsaw. She has been organising funds from her friends and relatives in Taiwan and buying supplies for the refugees in Warsaw.
这个战争真的是太可怕了，对。那如果说我们能够帮助他们，我觉得应该要帮助他们，对。
Sophie is just one of the many people around the world moved by the plight of Ukrainians. Wei Jiao, a Taiwan expat who has now lived in Poland for 10 years, has taken 2 Ukrainians into her own home.
As a Taiwanese in Poland, it's just like an Ukrainian in Poland. So I want to use my some knowledge or some experience in the past to support them how to go through this. Yeah.
21-year-old Margarita, who travelled for 64 hours on 7 trains to get to Warsaw from Cherkasy in central Ukraine, was not expecting to be welcomed by someone from the other side of the world.
I thought that people who helps, who put themselves in our shoes, they are also heroes, because it's not so easy to have some random people at your house to give them like anything you have. So it's also heroism for me.
It's been 3 weeks since Russian forces began their invasion of Ukraine, and in the last few days, Russian missile strikes have landed close to the Ukrainian border with Poland. People here are growing uneasy. But they say that won't stop them from doing what they can to help the millions who are fleeing Russian aggression. Rick Glauert for TaiwanPlus in Warsaw, Poland.
And Rick Glauert is on his way to Jeseł-Jasionka Airport near the Poland-Ukraine border and gave our reporter Bing Wang this update.
So we've been in the capital, Warsaw, which the city's population has swelled from anything between 10 and 20% over the last 2 weeks. There's a lot of basic services there. There's a lot of volunteers offering assistance to arranging accommodation elsewhere in Poland and around the country. So that really struck me at how much of a concerted effort the Polish establishment has made to look after the people that are coming from the Ukraine. There's even COVID testing and COVID treatment. That's all free for Ukrainian refugees. They can also access the public healthcare system here, and there's people there to help them set up documents they need for that. And we've also spoken to a number of everyday Polish people who have all gone above and beyond to help their neighbours, which has struck me. Virtually everyone we've spoken to feels very compassionate about the situation next door. They're willing to help Ukrainians in any way that they can. There's a lot of people that have invited Ukrainians into their own home. You'll see a lot of Ukrainian flags on cars, and they're all over public transport. In bars and restaurants, there'll be places for you to donate.
How are Polish people viewing the war?
I think there's a great sense of unease in Warsaw. I think that the Polish people we've spoken to do not trust Putin, do not believe that this war will end soon, and that there is a possibility that it could impact Poland directly. Of course, it's already impacted Poland. Like, there's so many people have had to move here. The kind of economic effect on the currency and that sort of thing from the war next door. So I would say that the people of Poland are wary that there is this huge conflict next door with such a big and unpredictable foe as Russia. And don't forget that Poland has had a lot of experience of being caught up in wars and conflicts in Europe before, amongst greater powers. There's a feeling here that there are a nation that has been caught up in huge geopolitical conflicts in the past. And I think that is perhaps why there is such a desire and readiness to help their country. And I think that's why there is such a genuine desire and empathy to help the people who are living in Ukraine.
US President Joe Biden is set to speak with China's Xi Jinping on Friday to discuss Russia's war in Ukraine. It's the first direct talks between the two leaders since a virtual meeting held in November. The White House has warned that Beijing could be considering assisting Russia militarily. The call takes place ahead of Biden's trip next week to participate in a NATO summit in Brussels. To find out more on China's position on Ukraine and Russia, I spoke to John Dotson, Deputy Director of the Global Taiwan Institute in Washington.
I'm personally skeptical that the Chinese leadership, again centered on Xi Jinping, is going to do very much to pressure the Russians, for example, to make a peace agreement or to withdraw. I expect they will be taking at least some limited steps to try to assist the Russian government because they want to keep that tie and they want to sort of foster that strategic alliance between the two countries that Xi Jinping himself is very invested in. In terms of President Biden's phone call with Xi or his discussions with Xi, I expect the Chinese leadership or Xi is going to be non-committal.
With this call and the previous sort of attempts, requests by French, German, EU leaders and also US officials, does Beijing think it has leverage over the US? And if so, how might it use this in relation to Taiwan?
Well, there's a long-standing and clear pattern where the Chinese leadership seeks to exercise leverage over the United States wherever they can. U.S. diplomats might want to try to hash out a set of agreements related to climate change and find that their Chinese interlocutors are constantly bringing up Taiwan or U.S. Trade sanctions or other things. So I think the Chinese leadership is certainly going to try to exercise whatever leverage they think they can in terms of this situation. At a minimum, I think they would be looking to try to extract from President Biden or from U.S. diplomats reaffirmed commitments to statements that have been made before, assurances related to non-recognition of Taiwan and things of that sort.
And in any possible move on Taiwan, does China expect Russia's support, or does this depend on how China handles Ukraine?
I think in a theoretical future scenario in which the PRC or China made some sort of military move to coerce Taiwan, I think they certainly would be looking for Russian support, if not necessarily active engagement. I think they would be looking for Russian cooperation and support in terms of doing things like deploying Russian naval forces to generate concern on the part of U.S. planners, for example. And they would be looking for diplomatic backup and support. I do think, though, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine having gone so badly, with the Russians really appearing to have sunk themselves into a quagmire, I do think it is going to be giving some pause to the Chinese leadership.
Taiwan's central bank raised interest rates for the first time in over a decade on Thursday, a move that surprised industry analysts as the economy starts to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. Our reporter Eric Gao has more.
With inflation on the rise in Taiwan, the central bank is taking action. At its first board meeting of the year on Thursday, the bank raised the benchmark interest rate by 25 basis points, or 0.25% to 1.375%. The move surprised analysts who had expected a smaller rate hike or none at all. The rate had been at a historic low for 7 quarters to help the economy weather the COVID-19 pandemic.
我们先把我们在前2年所调降1码的这个
It's the central bank's first rate hike in 10 years, taking the rate back to pre-pandemic levels. It said Taiwan's economy is recovering. The bank even nudged up its annual projection for growth, which is now estimated at just over 4%. And where there's growth, there's inflation.
我们国内的通膨率持续升高，那我们的预测，我们的通膨率呢是2.37%。事实上呢，全球各个国家的一个通膨率呢，都在国际机构都有调升的一个现象。
The interest rate hike will have an impact on homeowners and their mortgage rates. But Yang says payments won't go up by that much.
全国大概现在的贷款的余额大概是763万元，平均全国。那这样的话呢，他大概1年呢，他的负担会多少？他负担会增加多少？他的增加负担我们有做计算过，大概就是19000块。
The central bank is not expecting to hike rates further in the short term. Chris Ma and Eric Gao for TaiwanPlus.
The man convicted for the rape and murder of an international student in southern Taiwan has been sentenced to death after a year-long trial. The 30-year-old, surnamed Liang, was found guilty of sexually assaulting and then killing Malaysian national Irene Chung, a student at Changrong Christian University in Tainan, in October of 2020. The judge handed down the death penalty as the crime was premeditated and because Liang had shown no remorse over his actions. The verdict can still be appealed. Disruptions are expected at British ports after PO ferries suddenly suspended crossings and made 800 staff redundant without any notice. On Thursday, UK-based crew members learned via video message that they were being terminated immediately and would be replaced by cheaper staff from an external provider. P&O's Irish Sea and Continental Europe routes are likely to be suspended for at least a week. The company's handling of the layoffs has sparked outrage from unions and drew criticism from the British government. P&O is owned by the Dubai government and received millions of dollars of UK taxpayer support during the pandemic. A court in Honduras ruled that the country's former president can be extradited to the United States to face drugs and weapons charges. The US accuses Juan Orlando Hernandez of taking millions of US dollars in bribes to protect drug traffickers over almost 2 decades. The former president denies any wrongdoing, and his lawyers said he will appeal the decision. Hernandez's government enjoyed a close relationship with Taiwan. He made a state visit to the country last year before leaving office.
Welcome to Legit Mando. It's Jacob here and Mr. Sweet Potato.
It's us again, the perfect duo.
你好吗？
如果我跟他掉到海里，你会救我还是他？我喜欢你。
喜欢 means like.
I prefer telling people what I don't like.
吃过了吗？北光一鲜奶茶一样无糖少冰，要加小芋圆，不用吸管，谢谢。
I can't wait to learn more Mandarin. I'm just going by the script.
Your sarcasm is creeping back again.
Your feelings are correct.
Welcome back. Today marks 8 years since the start of the Sunflower Movement, which saw Taiwan's legislature occupied by protesters for more than 3 weeks. The action was in response to growing Chinese influence in the country and perceived undemocratic governance by the then ruling Kuomintang. Ryan Ho-Kilpatrick takes a look at its lasting legacy.
8 years ago today, a moment that changed the face of Taiwanese politics and heralded a worldwide shift in perspective. On March 18, 2014, demonstrators stormed Taiwan's legislature and stayed there for 23 days, the first time it had ever been occupied by citizens. They were there to protest the Cross-Strait Service Trade Agreement, a treaty brokered between Beijing and the Kuomintang government that would open sensitive industries to Chinese investment. For the students who led the charge, it was a life-changing moment, and, for many, the first taste of a career in politics.
台湾的民主很年轻，台湾民主的历程非常短之外，它同时代表是台湾还在充满着无限可能。
The movement's success in shelving the agreement propelled a new generation into politics. forming their own parties, or being absorbed by the then opposition Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP.
The opposition party at that time, the DPP, has been in power before. They have resources, they can absorb these young people, and they can groom them to be electable politicians. And it actually strengthened the DPP and help it to recruiting new members and new leaders, new generation. And I think they are going to take the leadership role sooner or later, and many of them are already elected.
But the legacy of the Sunflower Movement wasn't just felt in Taiwan. It influenced Hong Kong's umbrella movement, which erupted later the same year, and presaged a sea change in how the rest of the world viewed China under its increasingly aggressive and authoritarian new leader, Xi Jinping.
China's rise used to be perceived as a welcome constructive forces. But everything changed with Xi Jinping. I think that in 2018, there was a new narrative about sharp power that really changed the Western's image of the China. But in Taiwan and Hong Kong, I think what happened in these two societies were actually predating the world trends.
8 years after the fact, the Sunflower Movement has gone down in history as a pivotal moment in Taiwan's democratic development. But it's not just a matter of history. Its impact and the people involved continue to shape Taiwan to this day. Ryan Hill-Kilpatrick for TaiwanPlus.
To discuss this more, I sat down with Lin Feifan, who was a protest leader and is now Deputy Secretary General of Taiwan's ruling Democratic Progressive Party. He explained why the movement opposed the signing of a trade agreement with China.
A lot of people think that this agreement is actually will affect the people's living, and also that people are worrying about what's the next step after this trade agreement. Would it be a political agreement, or will it be a so-called peace treaty or peace agreement? So people are worrying that Taiwan go to a direction that cannot return. Yeah. So people worrying about the sovereignty, about the future of Taiwan would be absorbed by Chinese market and by different kind of legal force.
And what do you think is the significance today of the Sunflower Movement?
We think that we can decide our own future. We can decide our own destiny. You can change politics by your own action. Yeah. So this kind of willingness to participate in politics, that's the biggest legacy.
The sunflower is also the national flower of Ukraine.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you personally, do you connect with what's happening in Ukraine?
I think when Ukrainian people have the so-called revolution in 2013 and 2014, a lot of people in Taiwan and Hong Kong actually watched that movement and closely to see what happened in Ukraine and what the authoritarian government can do, what the people's action can really change the landscape of politics, also change the outcome of the destiny of the country. So, but we didn't feel like that movement is so close to us. We all want to decide our own future. That's one of the key connection between the Ukrainian people and Taiwanese people.
And now when you see what's happening in Ukraine, do you identify, do you connect with the people of Ukraine?
The situation is not comparable right now. The current situation, between Ukraine and Taiwan is different. But the values and sentiment, I would say it could be pretty similar. That when we saw Ukrainian people's resistance in recent days during this war, that really resonated with me. That in 2014, that I remember 2014 in February, that John Mearsheimer, a scholar, IR scholar, wrote an article saying that say goodbye to Taiwan. His argument is that China will finally control Taiwan. But after 1 month, the Sunflower Movement happened. That resonated with me about the current situation in Ukraine. That people also want to fight. People also want to defend themselves. They want to defend the right to decide their own future. That's the same spirit. That's the same values.
Taiwan's president is encouraging those who have yet to see the Hong Kong protest documentary Revolution of Our Times to head to the theatres. Tsai Ing-wen attended a special private screening in Taipei on Thursday. Taiwan is the only place in the world where the film has received a theatrical release. It is banned in Hong Kong. Released in February, the film documents the 2019 anti-government movement in the Chinese territory. It has proven a hit among Taiwanese viewers who see similarities between Hong Kong and Taiwan's own relationship with China. Tsai said the film is a reminder of the importance of democracy.
台湾也走过漫长的民主化的道路，对香港的朋友的经历，我们更能够感同身受，也让我们更加珍惜得来不易的民主自由。
Taiwan's King and Queen of Badminton, Zhou Tianceng and Dai Ziying, have both advanced to the quarter-finals of the All England Open. They'll play their next matches on Friday. Dai is currently the world #1 and has won the Open 3 times. Thank you for watching Taiwan Plus News. I'm Yin Khvat. We leave you with some images of Japanese noodle sorting robot, Foodly. For more stories from Taiwan and around the world, please download the Taiwan Plus app. Stay safe and see you next time.